My parents worked as wildlife conservationists. They always encouraged me to take part in trekking clubs, summer camps, or any activity that includes nature. I learnt a lot while exploring the wilderness, but this one memory still makes my entrails churn in disgust. I went to a summer camp in Sebago Lake. My parents went to Australia for a project at that time. Instead of sending me to my grandparents, they sent me to this camp so that I can learn some skills while having a good time with other kids. The camp instructor was a friend of my parents. I never knew his first name because everyone called him Mr. Bailiff. He was a strong, healthy man in his late 40s who always inspired us to take an extra step for the sake of adventure. He had a small team of senior campers who were assigned to navigate us through the day-to-day routine. These senior campers were young boys and girls aging from 16 to 17 years. All of them were pretty familiar with the camp style, which made me realize they have been with Mr. Bailiff for a long time. I, on the other hand, wasn't a newcomer either, as it was my third summer camp. I have always been an active child and loved taking part in almost everything. Apart from co-curricular, I loved taking part in the surprise treasure hunt. Almost every kid waited for it eagerly. To keep the game more spontaneous, Mr. Bailiff introduced this all-of-a-sudden technique. Whenever the air horn went on, everyone rushed outside to find a big jar filled with clues. The teams were divided and the game began. We had to search all over the campsite and sometimes even went inside the woods looking for clues. I was loving my stay there, but with time, I started to realize Mr. Bailiff is not the kind of man I thought he is. He used to get rude and insulting at times. If a kid couldn't pull off the task up to his expectations, he beat the shit out of that kid with his horrible choice of words. The anger in his eyes made him look ferocious when he scolded a kid over nothing. The senior campers never stopped him, which implies they were too scared to face him. Some seniors explained to us that Mr. Bailiff is only a strict instructor and means no harm. But what he did during our warm-up session made me feel disgusted. There was this one boy named Kurt. He was a bit overweight, but we were just kids. At that age, no one could say no to chocolate pudding. Kurt loved chocolate pudding and couldn't resist himself. After breakfast, we went to our wilderness exploration with Mr. Bailiff. He was teaching us about the different kinds of plants and animals residing in our ecosystem. Everyone was listening to him with great intention when a girl screamed in fear. We all turned to her and saw her pointing at the ground behind a bush. Mr. Bailiff walked to her and everyone else followed. As we reached near the bush, we saw rotten remains of a dead possum. Flies were hovering on it and a bad stench covered the air nearby. Mr. Bailiff turned to us and said, "No need to be scared. This is just a circle of life. Does anyone want to step ahead to bury this little guy?" No one wanted to. But these were Mr. Bailiff's weird life lessons that we had to abide by. When no one stepped up, he chose Kurt to do this job. With an overfilled tummy and long walk in the heat, Kurt was feeling uncomfortable enough. He said in a scared voice, "I don't want to do this, sir."
"Why? Don't you know how to fake dirt?"
"No, I do, but I don't want to go near it. It stinks." Mr. Bailiff screamed at him as usual and forced him to bury that possum's remains under the ground. Kurt dug up the first chunk of mud, and I heard him gag once. No doubt he was feeling nauseous, and as soon as he leaned on to move the possum using a stick, he puked on himself. The undigested pudding was all over his clothes. He started sobbing out of embarrassment, but Mr. Bailiff didn't spare him even after that. He yelled in his strict voice,
"I don't care if you vomit everywhere or even shit your pants. If you don't finish this task, I will make you eat your puke, boy.
What other option did he have? He did as he was told, while being drenched in his puke. The camp of enjoyment soon started to turn into the camp of torture. Mr. Bailiff was just too smart. He tortured the kids in the name of wilderness exploration and made it seem like he was teaching us how to come out of our comfort zones. Every kid in my dorm wished this nightmare to end so that they could return home. On the last week of our summer camp, we were counting days for it to end when Mr. Bailiff announced a treasure hunt. Following the rules, we got divided into teams and handed over the clues. There were artificial obstacles created for us to increase the thrill. Small hurdles like as crawling through a muddy ditch, jumping fences, climbing ropes to collect a clue was a part of it. Our team had to search for one clue inside the woods. Signboards were scattered throughout to give us hints on where the last clue can be. We were a team of 4, and to win the game, we decided to split up and look for it. I was walking by a small trail when I felt someone go behind the tree nearby. I couldn't see at first, but a small hand appeared behind the tree. "Hello, is it Jim?" No answer came. I walked close to the tree and peeked to see who's behind it, but found no one. Running footsteps made me rustling sound on the dried leaves, and a chuckle appeared. I turned around and saw a small boy dressed as a Boy Scout. He was of my age. A weird smile took place on his face, and he said,
Are you playing the treasure hunt?
I nodded in yes and asked, "Are you from our camp? I have never seen you before." He looked up to the tree branch above his head and said,
Is Mr. Bailiff around?
I said in a confused voice, "Yeah, he's conducting this game. I have to find the last clue or else."
Parker, who are you talking to?
I found Mr. Bailiff standing behind me with a pissed off face. I was going to introduce him to that boy, but he was nowhere to be found. Mr. Bailiff started scolding me for wasting time when I noticed the boy coming from the bush nearby. I pointed at him, telling Mr. Bailiff that he is the one I was talking to, and Mr. Bailiff's face turned pale. He stared at the boy with a shocking face, and for the first time, I saw him scared. He said in a fumbled voice,
But you are dead.
A boy chuckled and looked at the branch above his head and then back at him.
Why did you force me to climb this tree?
He started to walk towards Mr. Bailiff. I was stunned to see how excessively scared Mr. Bailiff was of this little boy. The more the boy walked close to him, the more Mr. Bailiff stepped back. He was sweating in fear and mumbling something. I couldn't make out what he was trying to say, but I noticed he was going to a steep edge. Mr. Bailiff was one step away from the edge when the boy stopped. He stood silently for some time, and then his head turned back at me. Just his head. I could hear the crushing of bones as his head turned to his back, and he looked at the tree once again and then ripped off his head with his dirty little hands. Mr. Bailiff screamed one last time, and I heard a huge fall. I must have fainted too, after seeing such a horrific sight. The senior campers rescued me and called the cops. Mr. Bailiff was taken to the hospital. Even though he didn't die, he broke his neck in such a terrible way that he has become paralyzed for the rest of his life. Before I could ask who that boy was, I overheard an incident that happened 2 years back. A boy named David came here for the summer. During one game of treasure hunt, Mr. Bailiff went a bit too rough on him and forced him to climb that tall tree, irrespective of the dangers that could occur. The boy was scared and traumatized, but Mr. Bailiff went on pushing him like always. Suddenly, he slipped and fell to the ground before anyone could catch him. He broke his neck and never woke up again. His parents were told it was an accident and no one revealed how responsible Mr. Bailiff was for that. I'm happy that the poor kid got his revenge. A man like Mr. Bailiff deserved it.